Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving out my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. It's been a while since I did a video. Not my fault, bunch of stuff happened, maybe I'll make a post about it. But in any case, during that time, I was mostly trying to just recover a bit, and one of the games I was recovering with was Pokemon Gen 3. Pokemon Gen 3 as a whole is a weird generation. I argue it's the second most forgotten generation after Gen 6. Though why Gen 6 is forgotten is a bunch of stuff, but we could talk about that game some other day. So that also just means it's also overlooked in a way that I think a lot of people don't appreciate it for. And that's why I thought a review would be interesting to talk about. However, during the playthrough, I figured out some weird thoughts in my head, and I thought I would talk about them there too. So, let's actually talk about the game. Now, before we continue on, I want to talk about the version I'm talking about, Emerald, and what a third version should always be. An expansion or a combination of both versions, which basically correlate the story into a more cohesive and better version of both games. Or more likely, the only version they should have ever made. Because as stated, they're usually the version that has everything that should have been in the base game, plus a lot more that makes it way worth it. Even though these versions usually sell worse than the base version. Like, if my records are correct, this is the second worst selling Pokemon game ever. Though to say that it sold poorly would be wrong, because this game sold well. Like, really well. Like, over 7 million copies. Yeah, the series has always eclipsed a lot of series with its sales, which is kinda sad when some series deserve it more, but anyway. But I'm getting off topic. So now, let us start with the review of Pokemon Emerald. Emerald begins with us in a truck. You know, people really do have messed up views about how kids should be treated, or how accurately they think children should be treated as. But that's beside the point. Anyway, we are moving into the town of Nuru, as your dad, Norman, is now in charge of the Petalburg City Gym. Actually, now thinking about it, why are we not living in the same town he lives in? I know that sounds weird, but I have no idea why they didn't. I mean, heck, in the anime, they even made it a point that the only reason why May's here is to begin her journey. Actually, speaking of the anime for a moment, just to side note for a moment, I actually think this season of the anime was actually pretty well designed and well written. Actually dealt with a lot of the ideas of factoids of this season, making it a good, very good combination of both of the game's stories, but I'm getting off topic. Though to keep on track with other material, they actually treat Norman, the dad, as kind of a dick in the manga, so But let's actually get back on topic. You're asked to meet your neighbors. This is where you meet your rival, either May or Brendan. They are actually the children of this region's professor, Bert, who's being chased down by a Zigzagoon. Originally, I thought it was a Poochyena. I swear on my life, I've seen the anime so much that my mind has replaced it, and somehow it's sadder because I originally thought it was sad to be chased around by a Poochyena, but being chased by a Zigzagoon is somehow worse. In any case, he asks you to choose a Pokemon from his case, and I gotta say something about the Pokemon. And let me just say this very clearly. Out of all Pokemon starters, Gen 3 has my all-time favorite one. I honestly think they are some of the best designed Pokemon in the entire series, bar none. I love them. Mudkip I usually skip over water types, except Oshawott. Oshawott's cool. But Mudkip is still cute, and it's still a great evolution line when looked at afar. Torchic evolution is nice and cool. I don't particularly like the fire types, but this one's really cool. I think it's fun. And Trico, my personal favorite Pokemon, makes it go from cute to cool to awesome. I mean, look at that guy! And speaking of the game's look, I actually really like this game's aesthetic. I know that sounds weird, but I can't explain it to someone. Like, there was something lost when they transitioned into Gen 4 that, while it's still good, I think it's just missing something, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. And yes, I know it's a little washed out, but that's just because of the GBA and how it basically had to deal with color. It still looks great. And speaking on the region, I also like how this region looks too, though it has a weird balance that we could talk about a little later. But the region is very variative and has a lot of different environments that make it unique, like the volcano plains, where you can actually collect the ashes to trade in for items, which are very much worthless, but still. Or a little town on the water that exists between a major city that can also spawn Mirage Island, that I didn't do because it didn't spawn. Data didn't align. Also didn't want to catch your Wynut. or the town that's mostly on top of a bunch of trees. It creates a very interesting world with unique places that later games would actually try to more emphasize and more rework, which can vary depending on the games, but some other day. You might be noticing that I'm not really talking about the plot right now, and really, that to my defense, there really isn't much of a plot, because after rescuing Birch and going on your journey, there's really not that much happening. And really, as much as I say the areas are unique, you still are doing the normal Pokemon thing of fighting all 8 gym leaders in order to fight the Elite Four and become the champion. Though that can be a little interesting because of something that happened, but we'll talk about that later when I need to talk about it. But you've seen this before, 2 times already, and if you're doing the remake version, you've already seen this a bunch of times. And really what's only noticeable about this game is the enemy group of this game, which there are 2 of them with Team Aqua and Magma, who are more focused on each other rather than on you because they basically hate each other. Though to say you interact with both Team Aqua and Team Magma is a little off. You actually interact with Team Aqua a little more in general, though I'm not entirely sure why, but you get the idea of the problem. And their goals are to either raise the level of the land or the sea level. I think you could tell which one's which. And honestly, this could have been interesting if the plot actually bothered to show why they would believe this to be an issue. Hell, not even the games, the anime, or the remake even bothered to explain their logic behind this. And that's not even considering that Pokemon in usually all of its media is usually in a utopian state where everyone is just pretty cool with each other. Like, I only had this problem is because, again, they refused to actually show off this sort of being a problem. Like, why couldn't certain places have issues, like the land is becoming too droughtful and it's causing an issue, or the sea levels are actually causing an imbalance in the nature of a certain place or something. I'm just making the point that there are simple ways to make this work, but it just isn't. And yes, I understand what the game is doing with these 2 and why I think Emerald is so much better, because it basically says they're both stupid. And by handling both extremes in the game and calling up a legendary Pokemon of the sky to keep the balance of the 2, basically allows it to have a more meaningful plot. I'm just saying that the overarching plot is just too bare bone to even do what is necessary to even do the plot. And some people might say to me that you're looking too deep in about a game about catching animals, and I'm like, I'm not asking for fucking Shakespeare, I'm asking for the fucking meat in this burger. Why are you even bothering with this if you're not going to actually resolve the plot in an interesting manner or even develop it? And to more importantly say, kids deserve better writing. That's just a matter of fact. Stop asking for shit. And like, I want to repeat again, I don't think the idea of the plot is bad, it just needs more connecting lines to make it worth the investment, however minor it is. Then the side note, if the game wanted me to focus not on it, why is it stopping me from progressing just to deal with this plot? And really, just talking about them is really what's all there is to it. Because if I can describe Pokemon's writing, it's that Pokemon's writing, in the games at least, has a beginning and an end, no middle. To give a prime example, let's talk about Wally. He's a minor character who starts off very weak and grows beyond that to become a powerful trainer. But it feels like it's a thing that just happens rather than a thing we see as we develop on our journey, you know what I mean? And I want to say, Wally is a good concept. They just do not want to develop him more. Though strangely enough, Wally is actually a character that never got an anime version. I mean, fucking Barry got one, but not Wally? And Barry didn't even have anything to do in the plot. I'm sorry, I'm talking about that way too much. And May? I'm not even sure what she does in the plot, she just exists. She exists just in this parallel sense of the plot, and really doesn't do much. There's the manga, but go read the manga. Like, I'm sorry for going so much into this story, but it's just like, I could see the potential of a good story. A basic one, but a good one nevertheless, and I'm just like, why bother? And yes, I know this game is focused heavily more on the gameplay. I'm just saying, then balance it right. This is normally where I talk about the gameplay, and normally I would just say it's Pokemon, it's basic turn-based RPG stuff. But when I was going through this game, I kind of realized something weird, and then just spotted something that I never thought about before, and really needed to talk about this because I have no idea why I didn't think about this ever before. I know that sounds strange, but allow me to elaborate. This video is going to focus mostly on the gameplay, and we're going to talk about it for a while. So you probably already know the basics of Pokemon. Basically, you can have a team of 6 Pokemon that you can capture, raise, and train to fight other Pokemon in battle. And in that team you make, you want to have a good variety of team members that can handle a variety of Pokemon, so that your team can handle their Pokemon more effectively, like using a fire type against a grass type, water against fire, so on and so forth. So it's all about figuring out the best sort of team to handle most situations at the time. And it is very interesting and competitive, can show a great dynamic, allowing players to more play around than just brute forcing stuff. Now you might be wondering, okay, why am I mentioning all this? Because I need to talk about, well, this is because of the weird level scaling of the game and just how the game is balanced. Because you see, throughout the entire game, I had to off-screen grind a lot just to match some of the levels of the game. And then sometimes just having to get the right Pokemon just to beat them because of weird match. And usually the typing would win me most fights even if I was very under leveled. Like, for example, Mauville Gym, where I had to train up a Geodude, the only available rock Pokemon at that particular point. Yeah, seriously, to beat him, as I had no Pokemon that could take the damage normally. Or the Flying Gym, where I had to say it is super bullshit because I've never heard this Pokemon's name said aloud, which is very weird, but you get the idea. Point is, it has a wide coverage that makes it hard to counter easily before it just straight up kills you. Or the Psychic Gym, that it's just so bullshit. So goddamn bullshit. Like, everyone in the gym is like level 36 or so, but the gym leaders are like level 41, which just makes fighting them way more harder than it should be. And while I did have the proper team, and while it did help, it didn't particularly help because Psychic Pokemon are still busted in this generation. And then there was the Elite Four, which super extended the game because I got around there by low level 40s, while they were at their level 50s. Just what is with this game's level scaling? What the actual fuck? And mind you, I had to grind off a lot of time just to basically meet their level. Because if you're not at their level, there is a disparity where you will lose. And mind you, the enemy Pokemon that you can just find randomly are still in the low 40s, so you're going to grind for a really long time. And the only reason why I was able to even be able to defeat them was by going double on these two. Very weird that these two would get me the most XP and money, but hey, who knows, you just need it. People's gotta do what they gotta do. Yes, I know what I did. Fuck it, I'm going with it. But for real talk, these two are the only way I was able to grind enough XP just to level up enough just to be able to fight them. Which ironically caused a big loop of a problem where I need to talk about it now because it was the preclusion of why I wanted to talk about this whole thing to begin with. See, when you look at my Pokemon stats, you might be noticing something odd about their entire stat line. That their attacks are really high, while their defenses are utter garbage, except Aggron. But it's Aggron, you don't worry about his defense. And that's mostly because we need to talk about EV points. So, short version of this stat, it's a stat that basically determines a Pokemon's growth. Say for example, you fight a bunch of Haruyama. They have an EV stat of plus HP, meaning every time you fight them, you gain an EV point that determines how much of that particular stat grows over time. And the more you have, the more it grows. And you might be saying to yourself, well, okay, well, just buy the particular type of Pokemon to raise up that stat. Why would I? No, seriously, why would I? And simply, I ask this because if I don't know this stat exists, why would I ever consider thinking about it? Hidden stats are kind of one of the things where I outright say I think they are a bad idea on principle, unless it's something more mechanically hidden or at least not important to the core of the game design. Because when you make a hidden stat important to a game, you are asking players to put more time and effort just to figure out what the fuck you're doing, rather than just telling them outright and just letting them think about how to work with this stat. It's insulting and just infuriating because this stat is not just important, it is fundamental to this game. And I get why it exists. It's so that your team is more variative and made sure that your team is your own team. But at the same time, it messes with you in such a way that I have to ask, how were players supposed to figure this stuff out? And not only that, the game doesn't even inherently incentivize raising these stats. You know what the game always inherently incentivizes? Levels and typing. Typing just mostly because of just the pure damage that it gives you, plus the hidden stab mechanic, another hidden mechanic the game doesn't tell you about, that gives you a 1.5 bonus on top of the normal typing bonus. Yeah, that only works if you're using the same type of move as your Pokemon, which I can sorta get, but at the same time, like, why keep it hidden? This gets more infuriating when you realize that this mechanic is fundamental to the most important other aspect of the game, that being competitive. These stats determine whether or not a Pokemon can be even viable for competitive. Which, might I add, very strange that Pokemon has always had this problem, where the divide between single player and competitive is so fucking vast that more times than not, unless you're one or the other, you don't care about the other side really all that much, because both of them require way more effort just to do. But going back onto the other reason of why the game inherently does not incentivize me for learning this mechanic, that being leveling. As levels are one of the only ways to gain new moves, there are TMs, but you get the idea, and evolving, which inherently makes your Pokemon stronger, so why not do that? So again, players aren't going to notice a hidden stat that influences them, but not in a way that is told directly to players what the fuck it means. I could also mention a Pokemon's nature, which determines what stat they're really good at and what stat they're really bad at, which really messes with me, as it's again another hidden mechanic that players aren't going to know until the later games where you actually told them, hey, here's how these stats work. Which, what? But still somehow not tell us what EVs are increasing, or a bunch of IVs, but again, hidden stats. And I only get so annoyed at this, it's because, why? It's fundamentally why I have a hard time saying that Pokemon is a beginner RPG. It has this hidden mechanic that fundamentally can mess with you, because if you only look at the surface, players aren't going to figure this shit out and might screw themselves over. I know it's Pokemon, but at the same time, why would designers create a system that inherently is decentralized by the game's own mechanics? And look, me saying all this stuff makes it sound like I hate the gameplay. Not at all, I think it's really interesting. Competitive can offer an interesting dynamic of which how the gameplay is working. I'm just saying how they keep trying to divide the competitive and single player is total garbage, and they really need to fundamentally rework it from the ground up, because the way they have it, I think it's just poor design, which is again not supported by the system at hand. And they've tried a few times to try to make this stuff work, but I arguably say they keep failing because, again, my number one problem is this. Players who are starting off and playing these games aren't going to learn this stuff, thus the divide between competitive and non-competitive is always going to be wider and wider, and I'm just asking, why are you not giving us the tools to bridge that gap? And ironically, one of the few times where I think there was a simple way to bridge that gap, it's one they made up for themselves. And one of my favorite aspects about Pokemon, the Battle Frontier. The Battle Frontier was something added in Emerald. The Battle Frontier is where trainers kind of train up their skills a bit. Basically throwing a bunch of competitive mechanics into you, where you now need to train up your team to try to be more competitive, or raise a whole new team, and give you the tools and abilities to understand these mechanics at least somewhat. while also adding interesting mechanical differences and challenges in front of you. Like one where you can't control your team members, but you gotta give them a good enough moveset that they can handle pretty much most things in front of them. Or one where you actually have to train in your Pokemon to try out different rental Pokemon that are very much competitively viable at the time, and actually show you some strategies that you might want to try out if you wanted to go competitive. But again, hidden stats make it harder to try to figure out how to do that. Plus, the place gave you access to a lot of items that would allow you to train up your Pokemon's special stats. So, again, I ask, why make a fundamentally important mechanic hidden if players are going to actively need it? And I'm sorry for sounding so negative, it's just that when you replay a game, you kind of notice all these minor things, and it's just become this thing where, how are we not talking about it? As much as we say this series is for kids, kids aren't going to know this stuff. They're not going to know about EVs, IVs, unless they actively go out of their way to look for it, which is something I do not agree with. If you need to go out of the game just to figure out what you need to do, the game has fundamentally failed. It's poor design on a fundamental level. I think that's something truly important in game design. Like, don't do that. That's dumb. And really, I kind of want to apologize to everyone here. Usually I would be talking more about the game, but I don't know. I just felt like talking a lot about the design of Pokemon as a whole for a moment, and talking about this weird aspect we just kind of don't talk about. Cause all honesty, I still love this game. And there's a lot of things I still love about it. Like the music. Like, straight up, the Alpha and Omega remakes are just amazing. They are great, but the base ones were already good. So all they were doing was just making them even better, which was very hard to say the least. And ironically, I want to talk about, for the rest of this video, I want to talk about the one thing that I really do love. And it's the one thing everyone doesn't like, or at least don't care enough about. But I actually enjoy it. I've actually replayed the game just to do this. Built up a new team that could actually do it, but in any case, what am I talking about? I'm talking about Pokemon contests and why I actively enjoyed them. I am not even kidding. I think they are a wonderful, cool idea. Mostly for two reasons. The first one, they're actually enjoyable, but we can talk about that in a moment. And the other one is, it's more stuff for Pokemon to do. Like, sure, we can all say like Gen 5 said, Pokemon are our friend, and other stuff, but like, wouldn't contests be more of an active way of showing that? And I could talk about Gen 5 some other day, because I have this script where I'm about to say, Gen 5 ain't as good as we like to think it is. But in any case, my point is, contest is just an interesting aspect and adds more to the world of Pokemon, showing off what they actually do more, and allowing us to have a different way of looking at these same mechanics in a different light. To elaborate on what a Pokemon contest is, basically, you sign your Pokemon up to a particular type of contest, like a cool, beauty, stylish, whatever, you get the idea. And after that, you basically feed your Pokemon Pokeblocks that you can find throughout the island, and berries are something else we didn't talk about. I don't know why I didn't talk about it earlier. Berries are now something that players can just plant around and actually grow over time while they play the game. It's really useful if you want a particular berry, like a citrus berry, to hold on to, but I'm getting off topic. My point is, it's useful, and after a bit, you will find certain berries that are basically only used for contests, as eating a certain type of berry will give a Pokemon a particular stat upgrade into the contest stats, which raises those particular stats up so that when they are judged, they get a bonus. And like, sure, it's really basic, but the other aspect is really what I loved about it, because we're talking about the contest showcase, where basically your Pokemon will perform a few moves to gain enough points to win the whole thing. At least that's the concept of it. And I honestly think this is really engaging and can be very thought-provoking in how you can play. Like, there are many strategies that you might need to take care of or have a good well-rounded team, because it's not just about having the best moves, but it's also about planning around your opponent's moves. Like, for example, you can have a move that goes last, but next time you'll go first, no matter what move you use. And that can be useful because of the bonus the game gives. You see, in the game, after 5 moves of a particular type, it will provide a particular bonus to whoever gets that final bonus, giving a lot more points. Meaning, you kind of want to get those points whenever you can, because as much as just using those powerful moves can work, it ain't gonna always be your best option. Or maybe you can use your moves to stall out your opponent's next move to make them particularly weaker, which can be helpful and allow you the potential to win out, even if in slight. It's basically a lot of give and take, wondering what moves you can use in advance to make sure that you win on top. And I really enjoy this system, and I wish Pokemon actually did more with it. But like after Gen 4, it disappeared, and I'm always sad about that. You know, as much as I'm complaining about this game, any of my complaints about it, I really don't hate this game. I kind of want to be clear about that. As much as I critique the game and say there's a lot of problems, there's still a lot good here. I just think that this game has something that I just don't know. It just kind of made me more realize the problems with more of the Pokemon games that were just there. I just ignored them. In a way of speaking, it's hard to explain. But at the end of the day, Pokemon Emerald, for all the faults I can give it, I still love it. I can't explain it. For every bad thing I hate, I love it in some other way. And it's just hard to explain. Sometimes my critical ability to talk about things just becomes harder and harder, and I just like it. I don't have a good explanation for why I do. I just do.